You know what, Boris? I always thought of you as a polite guy, but now you've gotten
You've
removed
changed
from
your mind, huh?
you've gotten removed from the polite list. You're now a rude man. You're a rude
Yeah.
Canadian.
Sorry about that.
You should
I'll,
be.
I'll try to do better.
You should. How old are you?
64.
Gosh, are you serious?
Yeah, I am.
No way. You sound like, oh my goodness, you sounded like you were 30 or something. What? 60? What?
64. Yep. I'll be
And you
65 in April.
No offense, all right. I'm not trying to be rude here, but you're 64 and you know how to use Discord.
Yeah.
Hello.
I probably know how to use computers better than you do.
Serious?
I've been using them since 1980.
What are
I
your
got my
specs?
first computer in 81.
What are your specs?
Good day, gentlemen.
Hello. So who's how come which one is it here? It says B33, which he calls himself, and then there's B3. So which is which?
I think we
Yeah,
need
so
like a
I'm
computer
they're
test.
both we're both B3. That's the
Oh,
one I
right.
have.
One's your recorder or something.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. I remember.
Now, if you have it set up and you're recording fine, I could turn that. I could leave, but I just like to have.
No, I just doesn't matter. I'm not worried about it.
All right, so it's 1:00. We ready?
Yeah,
Is everyone
you
here?
guys might as well go. Abu Based is here, and it's really you two
All right,
guys
so-
today. So welcome. For
Thank you.
for those, you might as well say who you are, and then after you say who you are, so others who don't know you get to know you a little better, and then you can, I guess, shoot off with like last time. I guess with a opening statement after you introduce yourselves.
Yeah, so on B3, everyone knows from the last debate we had an initial debate. This debate would be the rematch, the part 2 that Abu requested. The topics are. Oh, I thought you did. Sorry. It says, "Is Jesus Christ God? Was Jesus crucified? Is the Trinity true?" Are those the topics, Abu?
Yeah, from the flyer, yeah.
All right, so we could talk about that. We could talk about a whole range of things, right? So,
Why don't you introduce yourself, Abu, and then you guys can go at it.
All right. My name is Abu Based. I'm a gamer who loves PCs. I'm also a Muslim. We had a debate last time where I thought it was you who requested it that we could have a follow-up debate, and I'm like, yeah, sure, that sounds epic. And then
they played us both. They played us both. That's okay.
they played us both. Yep, the mods here are playing us. They're against us. The system is rigged. And yeah, I'm here to debate about.
I'm just the debate moderator. I don't actually set it all up, so
And you know
that's how I stay safe.
You know what? As part of my opening statement, I'd like to challenge Boris to a computer knowledge debate where we're going to debate who knows more about computers. I think that'd be pretty. That'd be pretty epic.
Go for it.
Yeah. So before you go ahead, let me just say a few things here.
All right.
I've been extremely busy. Oh, it's good to see you again, Abu, and I'm glad we're debating. But I've been I've been way too busy to make an opening statement, so I'm going to forego that, and it'll just be your opening statement, and I'll reply with my 10 minutes.
Okay, so am I going to like present my argument and stuff right now? Opening statement. All right.
Whenever you're ready, you make your opening, and I'll take notes and reply. I don't have an opening prepared. You can all go back to my original opening last time. It's the same stuff.
Man, I didn't even prepare either. I'm winging this stuff, but yeah. So I'm Muslim, and in regards to the position, which is on the flyer, which is Jesus Christ God? So it's 3 questions: Is Jesus Christ God? Was Jesus crucified? Is the Trinity true? As for the first part, as a Muslim, I would obviously say no. First reason is because the Quran says he's not God. But of course, I mean, one from outside Islam would say that's a circular argument, but whatever, we'll get into the other details of why it's not. why I genuinely think he's not God. I see inconsistencies within the New Testament where Jesus appears to be subordinate to God and appears to be submissive to God. However, and then in some other verses, there is a Trinitarian um, belief implied where he says, I and the Father are one. Or you can go to like First John 5:7, which is it's debated whether that was a fabrication or not. I've talked to some people on that, and that's probably the most explicit verse on the Trinity. Um, and when I look at the verses where he's submissive to God, and then I look at these kind of Pauline Trinitarian Christological verses, I kind of see a contradiction. And I see that Christians have to reconcile these contradictions with the belief of the hypostatic union, which I just completely disagree with. And in regards to that, the main reason why I think, and this will play into the third question, is the Trinity true? I see those contradictions just within the New Testament. And then I also see the New Testament contradicting the Old Testament, because in the Old Testament, I've never, ever seen, and I've posed this question to Christians many times, I've never seen any Trinitarian verses um, in the Old Testament, which the New Testament claims to be based off of. And if this core doctrine, which determines whether you're going to hell or not, wasn't even revealed in the Old Testament, and the prophets never taught it, what does that say about the doctrine itself? To me, it seems obvious it was concocted later on. Um, and was Jesus crucified? Obviously, I would be forced in the position to say no, because the Quran explicitly says he was not crucified. Um, Obviously, the New Testament makes clear that he appeared to be crucified, which we believe it was appeared that he was crucified, but we would say that Allah made it appear to the disbelievers that he was crucified, and that he himself was not crucified, that he was actually raised up to God. And the main argument against that is the preservation of the New Testament and the fragmentations of the early Christians, and how there's so many different sects which had so many different beliefs. Um, and about core doctrine at that too, like whether Jesus was God or not, this kind of stuff. Some some sects didn't even believe he was God and didn't believe in the Trinity. So the fact that we see this fragmentation sees that there wasn't really an absolute, according to the Christian story, that there wasn't even this cohesive doctrine from the outset. And when we look at New Testament preservation, um, they have no manuscripts, full manuscripts, past like the third or fourth century. And when you go back to the first or second century, like Papyrus B52, we see that these manuscripts are literally the size of debit cards. Um, no way you would call that preservation, which is fine. I don't think you need manuscripts to absolutely preserve your scripture. I believe that relies heavily on um, chains of narration to confirm those manuscripts. And even if you don't have manuscripts, if you have chains of narration, which yet again Christianity doesn't have, they don't have those chains of narrations to actually prove the statements of Jesus, which are made in the four Gospels. Um, and we have no chains of narrations for those statements. All we have is, Polycarp learned from this guy, or then Polycarp taught this guy. I can't remember the whole chain narration off the top of my head, but or Irenaeus or whatever. They don't have these full chains of narration, because these chains of narrations are in regards to who taught who. It's not in regards to Jesus' statements. So I don't think they can prove that Jesus actually said these Trinitarian Christological statements. When I see statements that Jesus makes, like the Father is greater than I'm like, based. But when I see like First John 5:7, I'm like, oh, it's not pretty based. It flies in the face of everything that is preached in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. It flies in the face of the Quran. So obviously, I'm going to reject verses like that. So my main argument towards literally all three of these points is New Testament preservation, and the way we um, hack isn't the right word, but to try and argue against the New Testament preservation, is through the contradictions we see in the New Testament and the fact that it misquotes the Old Testament, and the Trinitarian doctrine is found nowhere in the Old Testament, which the New Testament claims to be based off of. I guess that's my opening statement.
Okay, so just for preliminary purposes, I affirm all three. Christ is God. Jesus was crucified. The Trinity is true. So I just leave it open to Abu. Would you like me to give you like a 10-minute response to your opening, or should we tackle the most, whichever subject you want to tackle first?
You can give a response. It's fine.
All right, let me go back to my notes here because I told you I didn't prepare an opening, so I just took notes here. All right, so your opening said you're a Muslim. Well, I say a Muslim is a heretic. A Muslim is a heretic of Christianity. Like Muhammad was familiar with Christianity because Christianity existed sort of on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. Muhammad was vaguely familiar with like certain far sects that had fled into that area, like Pella, Arabia, all that stuff. As we, I don't want to go over too much that we went over last time, but I'll just briefly say like there was this sense in the Quran or in the Hadith that Mary was a part of the Trinity, or that the Christ was not crucified. Like these are things that were maybe floating around among heretics at that time, where Muhammad was active, but that was not orthodoxy. It was not part of the main church. So just putting that aside, my first question would be, why do you deny the New Testament and accept the Quran? Like, you're saying the Quran is some sort of infallible document, but you reject the New Testament. You say it's not reliable. There needs to be some criteria to differentiate the reliability of the one from the other, because they're just both ancient texts. Now, as far as the Trinity, you said there are certain apparent differences. Like there are apparent differences in different passages of the New Testament, and that's fine. Like we agree with that. Like that's the whole doctrine of the Trinity was brought about because they were harmonizing different statements in the New Testament. It seemed in certain places where Jesus speaks to the Father, the Holy Spirit is identified as God. Like you admitted all this, like so. The doctrine of the Trinity was harmonized out of lots of different statements in the New Testament, and so it goes back to the question: why do you reject the New Testament? And if you don't, then you have to have some. If you accept the New Testament, then there has to be some harmony between these apparently different statements, and that would be the Trinity. You asked about Trinitarian verses in the Old Testament. We can get to that later, but it doesn't really matter because Muslims themselves accept progressive revelation, so it doesn't matter. Even if there were no Trinitarian verses in the Old Testament, it could be a progressive revelation. But I would argue there are strong hints and strong suggestions in the Old Testament that God is multiple in His nature. That would not compromise divine simplicity, but He could have multiple relations within His nature, even as a simple being. As far as the crucifixion, the Muslim has to deny the entire consensus of the ancient world, the Christian world, the secular world, modern scholarship, even after 200 years of biblical criticism, the higher criticism. Germans, like the German higher critics, like they all try to tear this apart. But here we are in 2021, and all the secular atheist scholars say the crucifixion is one of the only things certain about Christ's life. You have attestation of this from the ancient documents, like the secular documents, like Josephus, Tacitus, Suetonius. You have massive number of in the New Testament alone. There's multiple attestation of the crucifixion. So what if the crucifixion didn't happen? How did nobody know this for hundreds of years? Where Muhammad comes around and says it didn't happen, it was some deception. Now, who deceived? God deceived. Allah deceived the early church. He deceived the world and said, for some reason, I'm going to crucify somebody in Christ's place. It seems to me, what is the motivating factor for why he would do such a thing to deceive the whole church, to deceive all of the apostles and the followers of Christ and corrupt the whole church? What's the motivation to corrupt these documents? Christians hold that the Old, the New Testament are in harmony, and the Old is concealed. The Old Testament is revealed in the New Testament is concealed in the Old. We have a complete system where they're coherent together, and the Muslims say, nope, we came along hundreds of years later in some remote area with Muhammad, and everything else is corrupted. I don't see the argument for that, along with Allah's motive to deceive. As far as preservation of these scraps of paper, I mean, no text is going to be dependent upon how many scraps of paper you found. The point is that like when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls and compare them to later documents, there was no real divergence between them over hundreds of years. Even a secular scholar like Bart Ehrman would say the only differences were like small copying errors of or is or that. Very few, if maybe none, that would actually change doctrine. You also brought up sects of Christians. There's thousands of sects of Christians. Well, that's because in Christianity, in the Christian world, you can be free to come up with a new sect. Where in the Muslim world, you have 4 or 5 sects, but it's very difficult to go out there. I mean, literacy wasn't even common until recently in the Muslim world. So of course, you don't have too many sects, and you also have to face the possibility of penal, penal punishment penalty to if you go outside the mainstream doctrines. Change of narration, we went over this last time. I don't think your change of narration are any more reliable than those of the church fathers and so on. So I'll just leave it there, and we can get into the actual points that you want to bring up.
Okay. So for the first part, the Quran doesn't say that Mary is a part of the Trinity. I know the verse you're quoting. It doesn't say that Mary is a part of the Trinity. It just mentions that this is an ilah. This is something that people worship. It doesn't mean it's a part of the Trinity necessarily. It just means that these Christians took Mary as a statement of worship. And when you look at Catholics, and I know you're Catholic, to us, when you make supplication, I know this is an argument Protestants also give towards Catholics, but when we see Catholics making supplication to Mary, we see supplication as an act of worship, and we have to actually affirm that because Muhammad Sallallahu he literally said that dua is ibadah. It means supplication is worship. So if you're making supplication to Mary, you're worshiping it. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, is saying in the Quran, is that you guys worship Mary. It's not a part of a trinity. Um, and also, in regards to progressive revelation, as Muslims, we don't believe there is progressive revelation for creed. We believe in terms of creed, that this has remained constant ever since Adam. Like it has remained constant, it's never changed. The only thing that we believe can be a part of progressive revelation is in terms of laws. So, like nations were given different laws to fit their current situation and so forth in time. But we believe that the Sharia that came with Islam, that's the final law that is given to mankind. So we only believe progressive revelation for laws. We don't believe that creed can be in regards to progressive revelation because we need to know how to worship God correctly. We need to know what to believe correctly. We can't just be, in the dark for thousands of years and then all of a sudden, the church fathers got it right. And then again, and in regards to the crucifixion, for us it makes sense for Christians to say, and for even scholars to say, that he's crucified, because as the Quran says, it's made to appear as if he was crucified. The motivation behind this was to save the Messiah and punish the kuffar, the disbelievers, who were the Jews and the Romans at that time, punishing them for their disbelief and fooling them, thus plunging them into further disbelief. So, and again, I mean, this argument isn't really a good argument, because if we go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11, it says, therefore God sends upon them a strong delusion to make them believe what is false. Therefore, God, even in the new, according to Christians, God in the New Testament, I mean, also deceives people, and he also makes them believe what is actually false. And to us, that's just like a punishment, plunging them further into disbelief so they can go to the hellfire. Because they were already because God knows their outcomes, right? Whether they're going to go to hell or heaven, right? And if they have hatred towards his truth in their hearts, they're going to be plunged further into disbelief. It's a punishment from God. So Christians can't use that argument because they themselves believe that. Thessalonians. In regards to the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, I haven't read the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've heard from multiple Haredi Jews who actually know who, I mean, obviously their specialty is Tanakh, not the New Testament because they don't believe in the New Testament. I've heard that, I can't confirm this, but that's only 60% of it is preserved, and the rest, there's actually heresies within the old Dead Sea Scrolls. And even if we did take that the Dead Sea Scrolls were preserved, and I'd have to contact other, I mean, Jews who have read it and tell me where the heresies are. But if we take that they're preserved, that doesn't really matter to me, because I mean, we believe that the Old Testament was corrupted before that. Especially when we read the stories of Ezra and the Great Assembly, of where they changed Torah verses. This is very startling. So we believe that it was changed before that. In regards to literacy in the Muslim world, obviously literacy was actually growing in the Muslim world right after the advent of Islam. It wasn't recent. Maybe it's recent for like people who lived like in the desert, like the Bedouins and stuff. And even then, a lot of them are still illiterate because they're in the desert, they're Bedouins. But in the Muslim world, especially if you research the Islamic Golden Age, literacy was definitely increasing far before the 20th century in the Muslim world. In regards to chains of narration, our chains of narration, the way we actually, in regards to both Christians and Muslims, our methods of chains of narrations are very different. For us, chains of narration include multiple chains, and there's for specific statements. Not just like this teacher learned from this teacher, learned from this teacher. No, it's like for specific statements, there are multiple chains, right? There could be like 20 chains for one narration, and then for another chain there could be 50, and then another chain there's like 10. I mean, it's not just this teacher learned from this teacher, so then whatever someone in the chain said, we just assume that that statement is what was taught by John, for example. um, if you look at his chain narration, which for us, this is completely weak. Any hadith sciences would be thrown out, and in fact, it wouldn't even be considered a hadith. It's not even a narration. It's just a who learned from who, and we would need biographies by multiple witnesses who knew the man to actually attest to his reliability, to his memory, and to his trustworthiness, which I just don't believe you guys have. I mean, that kind of addresses all of the points. Yeah, I guess I don't know if you want to bring up more points or respond to that, but you can go ahead.
Those were the points you raised out of what I said, so we'll deal with those. I'm sorry if I was typing. I thought I had myself muted there. I was taking notes. So let's start with the first thing that we mentioned. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the first thing that we had in contention was that is there a passage in the Quran that says that Mary is part of the Trinity? Hold on one second. Okay, so the quote that's typically referenced here is verse 116 in the Quran there, 5116. Are you denying that the Quran teaches that Mary is part of the Trinity? Should we go over the entire verse, or maybe you're right, maybe I'm right?
Okay, so I'll read the verse. And beware the day when Allah will say, "O Jesus, son of Mary, did you take the people? Take me and my mother as deities beside Allah." He will say, "Exalted are you. It was not for me to say, to which I have no right. If I had said it, you would have known it. You know what is within myself. Do not know what is within myself. Indeed, it is you who is the knower of the unseen." I mean, it only mentions two people. If it was mentioning a trinity, why didn't it mention three? And why didn't it say that the Christians say this is three and one and three? It only mentions two people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not too familiar with the Quran, obviously. I'm a Christian. I haven't studied the Quran in depth the way you have. Now, when I pull the verse up, there are multiple passages here, and each one refers to like a different person, like Mufti Taqi Osami, Dr. Gali. These are just different Muslim scholars, I take it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, are you looking at translations?
I'm looking at Quran.com 5116 translations, and there's like 12 or 14 of these
Yeah.
here.
So
So
are you,
you only read one there.
Yeah, and they all say the same thing. So if I went to like Yusuf Ali, for example, it'd say, "Oh, Jesus, son of Mary," and then okay, we'll
Okay.
just go.
So they're just different translations. Now, is this the only area where Christians claim that Islam teaches Mary's part of the Trinity, or are there hadiths also?
I'm aware of no hadith which says Mary is a part of the Trinity.
Well, I'll check on that after the debate to see if you're correct, or maybe you don't know, or maybe I'm wrong, or maybe people who claim it are wrong, or maybe whatever. We both don't know. Maybe there are some. So let's just deal with the actual passage itself. So I'll just go with the first translation that I see here, which is pretty simple. So what you said, it said, "Take me and my mother as gods besides Allah." Christianity in no wise, in no way teaches that Mary is God. She's a creature. She's created. There's nothing in Christianity that would suggest that Mary is God. Now you could say people pray to Mary and pray to other saints, or you might ask your neighbor, pray for me, intercede on my behalf, but it's always going to go to God, right? So there's nothing here that has, unless he's dealing with some heretic on the outskirts of the Roman Empire at some time. This is certainly not Christian doctrine. It also says, pure are you. It does not behoove me to say what is not right for me. Had I said it, you would have known it. You know what is in my heart, and I do not know what is in yours. You alone have full knowledge of all that is unseen. Is that referring to Mary?
Okay, wait, repeat that.
Well, just the last part. You alone have full knowledge of all that is unseen. Is this supposed to refer to Mary?
Okay, so it's saying, so this is Jesus talking to God, and it says, "Indeed, it is you, God, who is an over the unseen." That's all he's saying. Yeah, he's just saying that you are the one who knows the unseen. Jesus and Mary don't know the unseen like God does. So I don't see the again. I explained why it says, "Oh Jesus, son of Mary, why take me and my mother." Did you say to the people, "Take me and my mother as deities beside Allah"? Okay, so in regards to like what we in Islam consider gods, like in ilah, right, is anything that people take as an object of worship. Okay. So if people took a water bottle, because I'm looking at a water bottle right now, people started worshiping it, that would be called an ilah because it's something which people worship. So all God here is asking is, oh Jesus, did you say that you should that the
Who's
people should take
Gadir? Sorry, who's Gadir?
who's Ghadir?
You said who? You said all Hadir asks is who's that? I'm not reading from.
I said God, God, God.
Oh God! Oh God! Here,
Allah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it
the
says,
accent. That's all.
yeah, yeah. Maybe my Midwestern accent makes it hard, but it says, "Take me and my mother as deities beside Allah." So, and then we have a hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he literally said that du'a is ibadah, that supplication is worship. So, if you're making supplication to Mary, and this is working from the Islamic paradigm, this verse makes complete sense because Christians both make supplication to Mary and Jesus. Okay, so that's why it says it because we consider
Sure, sure.
anything that worship as it. So, like even example, saints, people take them as an idah, as something, an object of worship. So I guess we're just more
How do you
strict
define worship?
on what we call. Okay, so worship is any action that Allah, yeah, told his servants to assign only to him, or actions that you should only do unto him and no one else.
So let me ask
Yeah.
you. So
So some
if you had a dead relative, so your grandmother died some years ago, and during
mhm.
some moment of introspection or solitude or prayer, you sort of said to your grandmother, "Look out for me." Is that worship?
Yeah, that is worship, and that's actually polytheism. You'd be outside of Islam if you did that.
Okay, so the dictionary definition of worship is the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration for a deity. The second definition is to show reverence and adoration for a deity in honor with religious rites. So, no Christian in any sort of orthodox sense takes Mary to be a deity. Like she's a created being. So, can't we just throw this out as put it aside? Because there are no Christians, let alone me as myself as a Catholic. None of us take Mary to be a deity.
Okay, you're like, again, you're working from the English language, and we're trying to like compare that to an Arabic word. The Arabic word ilah like, yeah, roughly translates to a deity, but it's really just anything which is pointed out to as an object of worship. And in Islam,
That's why I defined worship. Go on.
okay, so well, we have to define worship by the Islamic way of defining it because we're talking from the Islamic paradigm. So supplication is included in that. Whether the Christians think it's included in that, that's not my problem. I'm not Christian. But from the Islamic viewpoint, that is a part of worship.
Okay.
So
Make it more clear to me, because you could supplicate a king or a governor. Like, so what kind? What do you mean supplication?
okay, so I'll try to explain this. So do you know what the word tawhid is? It means like
No idea.
okay, basically means to like single out God in all of his attributes and affirm all of his attributes and like affirm his lordship and to single him out in regards to all your actions of worship. The scholars split this into three categories: Tawhid al-Rububiyyah, Tawhid al-Uluhiyyah, and Tawhid al-Asma wa Sifat. And in regards to Tawhid al-Asma wa Sifat, um, Allah, God, has the attribute of the all hearing. Like he can hear you no matter what, because he's has all encompassing knowledge. Um, if someone's dead and you're making supplication to him, right, and he's not alive, he can't hear you. You are assigning that attribute of the all hearing to that dead person. That's why it's
No, you're not.
polytheism. Yeah, you are.
No, we're not. No, nobody. No Christian, certainly no Catholic, claims that Mary is omniscient or can hear all prayers. I mean, it could be simply that God Himself recognizes in your prayer deference to Mary, His mother, or it could just be that God vouches to Mary to hear some prayers, or it could be that she hears prayers to her. There's no omniscience there. There's absolutely. And you didn't answer the question I asked. Like when people supplicate a king, so supplication itself can't be the issue. It has to be to
Yeah,
presume.
because you
It
cut me
has to be.
off.
It has to. It has to be. I didn't cut you off. It has to be to presume that she's some sort of omniscient and omnipotent being, which none of us do. So I think we should put this aside, as it's
No,
obviously false.
that's not it. That is not, you misunderstood me and you did cut me off. So if there is someone who is alive and you ask him to do something for you, he's alive and he can hear you. You're not assigning any attribute of God to him because he is able to hear you. So you can supplicate to him technically because he can hear you. But if you supplicate to a dead person thinking that they can actually hear you, how can they hear you? That you are assigned, you're calling directly to him. You're not saying, "Oh God, bless him in heaven," or whatever, or raise his rank in heaven. Okay, that's not polytheism because you're calling out to God. But if you call directly to Mary, "Oh Mary, Mother of God," do this or that. You're calling directly to Mary, and you're
Sure.
assigning the attribute of the all-hearing to Mary. Again,
Nonsense.
I don't care.
Nonsense.
I don't care about your opinion. This is from the Islamic paradigm.
Well,
The,
let me know
the
when you're done, because I thought this was open discussion at this point.
okay. Because you're trying to criticize the verse for mentioning take me and my mother as deities besides Allah. You're working from the Islamic paradigm. If you work from the Islamic paradigm, this verse makes complete sense. Okay, we're not concerned with what like Christians like what they think is okay, because obviously Christians don't think they're committing polytheism. They'll be like, we're not doing that. So it's just a redundant argument from the Islamic paradigm, though, and if you're trying to work from that, trying to criticize this verse, it doesn't work because from the Islamic paradigm, it makes complete sense. I don't care if it contradicts the
Okay,
Christian
good,
one.
good, 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 good. I think we're on the same page now. So, in the pre-Islamic paradigm, there was no prohibition against invoking some Old Testament saint or invoking, Elijah or Enoch who are in heaven with God, or invoking anybody. Like there was no prohibition. So that's why I said earlier that Islam, it doesn't just introduce new laws; it's progressive revelation. It introduces new doctrines. So the question would be then, what is the basis? We can move forward. I've already sufficiently refuted that we don't consider, from the Christian perspective, Mary is not a deity, but we could certainly speak to her or the saints or the Old Testament saints and say intercede on our behalf, speak to God. We only see God as omniscient, omnipotent. Anything that these other created beings have would be from God. So that's not an issue in the Christian paradigm. But now you're saying something like there's some prohibition or some new doctrine in Islam, And so the question now becomes, we can move forward here. Why would you think that the new revelation of Muhammad, progressive revelation, because this is not in the Old or the New Testament, that you can't speak to a saint or a dead person or
Yes, it
anything like
is.
that? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But so from our point of view, we don't worship Mary, and now you also denied the claim that there's progressive revelation. So where would you say it says in the New Testament, for example, that I mean, I can give you passages from the New Testament where it says like the prayers of the saints go on the altar, and the saints are dead already. Like, so these are people who died in Christ. Like, so now we're going to sort of get into why is the Quran something that you take to be authentic and completely uncorrupted, and then why would you think that the earlier scriptures are corrupted?
Okay, so I don't believe that the talking to dead saints and stuff was allowed before Islam, because in your own Torah, it clearly says that praying to the dead or making supplication to the dead is an abomination. And this, I mean, it's literally in your own Bible. I don't need to like even like go further than that. It's not something which was
Yeah, but
allowed. It
Mhm,
says that
mhm.
making supplication to the dead is an abomination. And even in Leviticus 19:31, it says, "Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists. Do not turn to mediums.
Well, who
You
turned to
only
mediums? We're not talking about turning to mediums. Mediums would be like magicians or sorcerers who say they can talk to the
mediums
dead.
mediums would be like
That's
you
nothing to
praying to
do
a
with praying to
saint."
the saints.
Yes, it does, because a medium is an intermediary between you and God, and you pray to the
Yeah,
medium saying,
but that's
"Oh,
not.
saint so and so, talk to God and give me this." This is what the Bible just prohibited in that verse.
Yeah, but in the verse you read, you partially read it. It has nothing to do with praying to the
I can
saints.
read the
It
whole
says don't.
thing.
Well, but regardless, but you can do that after. But it says don't seek out mediums like source, like people in the world who say I can talk to the dead. That has nothing to do with praying to the saints. And I'm looking at Revelation here, 5:8, and that's in the New Testament. We consider that to be inspired. And as Christians, since we believe in progressive revelation, you say you deny it. I don't think you do, but we don't deny it.
I
We
didn't
say
say
it's
I denied it. I said I denied it in terms of creed.
right. Well, we're talking about. I think we're talking about creedal things here. We're not talking about laws, right? Maybe we are. We'll figure that out later. So it says in Revelation 5, John's vision of heaven's throne room when the Lamb had taken the scroll of God's judgment into his own hand. 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one, I hear an echo. Can you stop the echo?
Do you hear me echoing?
No, my own voice is coming back at me.
Okay.
It's better now.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it's better now. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. Um, it seems to be saying that the prayers of the saints in Revelation 5:8, especially as represented by incest in the context of temple imagery, should be understood to take the role of incest of incense in the temple, which was to offer up a sweet aroma to God and to symbolize prayer. The prayers of the righteous are pleasing to Him, right? So I don't see. May my prayer be. It says here, may my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. So, as Christians, I don't think we have any problem offering up our prayers to the saints, as long as we all understand that they're not deities. Any power, anything that they have, any ability to hear us comes from God and it goes to God. So um, maybe we should just move past this topic, because clearly, from our own point of view, we don't consider these things, these people, these creatures to be deities. So it's not worship. From your point of view, you have some special law that came out later that
No, your own
um,
Bible says it.
well, but the passage you quoted doesn't
I
say that.
can
If
quote
you want to,
another one if you want.
please go.
Deuteronomy 18:11 through 12. Okay, so or cast spells, and this is kind of cutting off whatever verse came before it, but the main point is, or cast spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. And consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord.
Yeah, it says cast spells. Like, who's
It
casting
says
spells?
who consults the dead. It says or, not and. It says or consults
Yeah, but who's
the dead.
consulting the dead? We're offering a prayer. Who's consulting the dead?
It means anyone who goes and seeks out the dead and prays to them. This is a detestable act
Yeah, but to me,
to the Lord.
consult means you're expecting to hear something back, or you're trying to invoke like an incantation, some necromancer, some sort of
Where
sorcerer.
does it specify
Excuse me,
that's
I'm
only for
talking.
necromancy?
let's quiet down a little bit. So yeah, so everything you've read so far on those two passages talks about seeking out mediums, people who are doing magic and doing incantations to the dead. It doesn't say anything that you can't offer a prayer to God in the name of Mary or some other highly venerated person. So I think we should move past this because we're just talking two different paradigms. In the Islamic paradigm, they're saying that we hold Mary to be a deity. We don't in our paradigm. So there's really no further anywhere to go with that. So we should continue on. I'm still in my response to your response. So do you want to move forward?
Sure.
Okay. So the deception of the crucifixion. You said because Christ was some great prophet, he came and he was saved by God, and somebody else was killed in this place. Can you flesh this out a little?
You pretty much just summed it up. I don't need to flesh it
So,
out anymore.
So tell me, I mean, there's been many prophets that were killed in the temple and that were killed, or some of them were raised into heaven. What on earth could possibly be the motivation for the God of this universe to deceive all the followers of Christ and all the world,
They didn't
even unto
deceive
our?
the followers
Stop,
of
stop,
Christ.
stop, stop, stop! I'm not done. Stop. So, what would possibly be the motivation for God to deceive the whole early church, Paul, everyone, even up to our present time in the scholarship? What would be the purpose of deceiving them and saying like he stuck Jesus' twin on the cross and it wasn't Christ himself?
Yeah, it wasn't his twin. But in regards to the motivation, no other prophet was given the title Messiah. So obviously Jesus has a great rank in heaven. And on top of that, according to your own Bible, the one who dies on a cross dies a cursed death. So we wouldn't want prophets dying a cursed death, now would we? So it makes sense that God would save Jesus from this situation, and then thus fooling the people who had kufr, disbelief in their hearts, and driving them further into disbelief. And this, you shouldn't have an issue. I mean, I know you have an issue with the crucifixion part, but for the deceiving, the disbeliever part, you should have no issue, because you likewise believe there's going to be an antichrist coming at the end of time that's going to deceive people. God allows this, and God literally says in Second Thessalonians that He's literally going to send upon them a strong delusion to make them believe what is false. This is a punishment towards the disbelievers and driving them further into disbelief
Sure.
because of the hatred that already exists in their hearts.
All right. So in the first place, you mentioned it's like a curse to be hung upon a tree, all that stuff, and that's actually passages right out of Christian scripture. They say, um, Jesus was like the lamb. He was the lamb that was sacrificed. All the sin was put upon him voluntarily, but put upon him as the perfect sacrifice. He's the high priest. He's this perfect sacrifice, and that is what cleanses us of our sins. So it shouldn't matter that that in his flesh he was accursed, because that's the whole doctrine of the atonement, right? Now you also said God, he was the highest prophet, so unlike the earlier prophets, he shouldn't be killed. God should save him. But I mean, in that case, you'd think God would come along and like raise him up in victory, not pretend that someone else died in his place and deceive the whole world. So you're not answering what his motivation was to deceive everyone. It's not just that he deceived the liars and the enemies. Apparently, from your point of view, he deceived everyone except Muhammad until Muhammad taught these things to other people. So you're not answering the question what the motivation would be to deceive the apostles, his followers, and so on.
We don't believe he deceived the apostles. We believe that he deceived the Jews and the Romans who were trying to crucify him. Again,
But
when we look
but
at
it's
your
the
own history,
Christians who believe that he was crucified. It isn't.
okay, but we don't believe your history, and your book has been preserved and is like made apparent when we see the contradictions and misquotes that your book has. So we're not going to trust a corrupted scripture.
Right. So here we come to another topic of the race. So you believe that the Old and the New Testament are corrupted. But what is your
Yes.
criteria? What is your criteria for that, other than what Muhammad said? Is there some pre-Muhammad criteria to determine which passages are preserved and which are corrupt, or is it just whatever Muhammad happened to say?
We look at what the New Testament says, and we look at the contradictions it has. If a book, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God says in the Quran, if it was from other than Allah, it would have much contradiction in it. And when we look at, and that's a criteria for us. If we look at the New Testament, we find much contradiction in it, and we find it contradicting the Old Testament many times. So that's our criteria. If we find contradiction in it and it claims to be from God, then it's not from God.
Now,
Because
when you say contradiction, do you mean contradiction of some truth that's established secularly, or do you mean contradictions among verses?
contradictions among verses.
So if you have contradictions among verses, how do you know which verse is the true verse, or do you just throw them both out?
So we have a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ literally, when he was talking about reading in regards to the Old Testament and the New Testament, that we don't affirm or deny it. So when we see two verses that contradict each other, we don't affirm either of them, we don't deny either of them, unless it's like crystal clear that this is obviously disbelief. So when we see a verse that says, like 1 John 5:7, we're going to reject that because that's just like to us.
Read that verse, or state the verse, or summarize it.
1 John 5:7. I'll just like look it up so I can just read it. Okay, so this is like the only verse which really specifies the Trinity, and it's actually debated whether this is actually an insertion later on in like the 16th century. But it says in the King James version, it says, "For there are three that bear record in heaven: the Father, the Word," and that's referring to Jesus, "and the Holy Ghost." And these three are one. This is basically the only crystal cut Trinitarian verse in the New Testament, which is
Now,
it's debated whether it's actually corruption.
what about Acts, where it says, "Go forth and bless all nations," and so on, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit? Or what about John 1:3, which says, "All things were made through the Word; without Him, there was not anything that was made that was made." I can give you I can give you hundreds, or maybe dozens at least. Like, I'm being hyperbolic here. I can give you many dozens of passages throughout all four Gospels and the epistles that suggest that Christ is divine, and that there's the Holy Spirit's divine. So you mentioned one. There's many others.
No, but in regards to the one that go out and bless people in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, it doesn't specify that these three are in one. This one is the one which is the most specific because it does add that as like a technicality.
Right.
Like
So it
these
seems.
are
Mhm.
so
It
that's
seems
why.
like we've kind of we've gone past the contradictions issue. You say that the only new creedal teachings that, or the only creedal teachings rejected by Islam in the Old and New Testaments are where there's a clear contradiction, but you don't have actually an opinion on which are true or if both should be rejected, right?
Um, yeah, so we don't affirm or reject the verses unless it's, like I said, crystal cut clear that this is obviously going against Islam, like 1 John 5:7. We're going to completely reject that. But in regards to verses which aren't crystal cut like that, we don't affirm or deny them, basically.
Right.
Because
So, okay, so that's sort of clear at this point. So let's move on to the Trinity, the divinity of Christ, because these were important topics for the general debate topic. Um, Where do you find any do you want to raise some contradictions, or do you want me to raise some passages that show the divinity of Christ in the New Testament, or do you just
I mean,
reject them all out of hand?
again, so if you're gonna bring me verses from the New Testament, that isn't really gonna mean much to me when the same book contradicts itself and contradicts the Tanakh. So if it's doing that, how could I trust the book to begin with?
Well, you claim there are these contradictions, but Christians have taken upon themselves the burden to say that all the scripture is in harmony, right? So we say it's in harmony. We don't reject anything. You
Okay.
guys come along and you reject, you pick and choose which verses you think are good, and you say that it's corrupted. I still don't really understand any objective pre-Mohammedan criterion. It seems to be just like anything that you see as contradictory on its face, you just throw out of hand. You don't make any attempt to harmonize, and it's almost. And then the other things would be anything Muhammad teaches that contradicts the old and new. That would be some sort of contradiction. Those are your criteria.
I mean, the contradictions by itself disproves the authenticity of the New Testament. There's
Okay, but
multitudes of them.
Muhammad teaches contradictions to the old and new, so why doesn't that throw him out?
What do you mean? Because this revelation that Muhammad SAW gave, yeah, it's claiming to correct what is false in both the old and new. So if it contradicts certain things in the old and new, that's no problem for us. The issue with the New Testament is that it claims to be based off the Old Testament and believes that the Old Testament is inspired by God and that the Torah we have today is the literal word of God. So if the New Testament is contradicting a scripture which they believe is preserved, this is an issue. But if our book contradicts corrupted scriptures, we don't care. That's not an issue for us. It's an
Right. So
issue
the
for
key
you.
word there, the key word there was claiming. Like Muhammad claims these things, right? And as I said already, as Christians, we hold that the entire Scripture is unbroken and it's easily harmonizable, right? Where you guys claim it's all corrupt, and you take some passages that you like, you reject the ones you don't like, and you say that because Muhammad claimed X and Y, therefore it's true. But why do you not hold Muhammad to the same standard? You say, let's say he claimed something that was clearly contradictory to the New Testament. Why doesn't that throw Muhammad out along with the other passage? The same criteria apply to old and new. What makes Muhammad special?
Yeah, because we don't find any contradictions within the Quran or the Hadith. We do find contradictions within the New Testament. Like I
Are
said,
you saying that? Are you saying any two books that don't have contradictions between them are therefore true, like Harry Potter 1 and 2?
no, it's a sign that this is actually inspired from God. Harry Potter didn't claim to be inspired by God, nor does it teach monotheism, and nor does it
So
have
any
prophecies to
let me
confirm its validity.
let me rephrase then. So any two books that claim they're inspired by God that don't have contradictions are true.
If a prophet comes and they receive a new revelation
Begging
and a
the
new
question,
law, I'm answering the question.
begging it, but go ahead.
I'm not okay. It didn't even finish. But if a prophet comes and receives a new book and gives a new book to a people, and this book is claiming to be sent from God, yeah, and it has no contradictions in it. No contradictions is a sign that this is truthful. But then we have to couple that with, is this guy a true prophet? Because how do we know this is not just gibberish he's spouting out? Okay, well then we have to judge. Like, does he have the signs of a prophet on him? Is he truthful? Was he ever known as a liar? Did he ever commit polytheism? And does he have prophecies to validate his prophethood? And when we look at Islam, yeah, we check all those boxes. So just if it doesn't just have if it doesn't have contradictions, that's not enough to say that this is from God. But it's a sign if it claims to be revealed from God, and the prophet who received this revelation proved his prophethood, then yes, it's inspired by God. But if we look at Harry Potter,
Hang on, stop there. So did Christ prove his prophethood?
so yeah, we believe that Christ proved his prophethood, and we
Yeah.
believe he's a prophet because it says in the Quran. We can
Sure.
prove that the Quran is received revelation. We
Now,
don't go to
did
the New
Daniel
Testament.
prove it? Did Christ and Daniel both prove their prophethood?
Okay, so
Just answer the question, please.
well, I don't know if like Daniel's even mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith. So like in regards to
Why is that relevant?
because you're asking me to affirm something which I don't know if I can affirm. So in like regards to like prophets like Jeremiah that aren't mentioned in the Quran, the Hadith, he might have been a prophet, but because he's not mentioned in the Quran,
Again,
the Hadith, we can't confirm it because we don't want to fall into kufr.
well, you
Disbelief.
you gave a criterion for Muhammad that he proved his prophethood, and that is what makes him reliable in a special way.
Yes,
So
but
why
from
would you? And
okay, but here,
I reply. Stop. I'm talking. So I replied to you that I can find any two books in any religion that don't contradict each other, that make claims about prophethood. Perhaps Daniel and something Christ said. So if the only criteria is that they don't contradict each other, then you'd have to accept all these books. You need some
already, I
better criteria.
literally just said that is not the only criteria. I said it's a sign. This
So
is
what
not
is the whole criteria? Give me the whole criteria.
well, the person who receives the revelation actually has to prove his prophethood, and this can be done by like prophecies or miracles. Miracles is a part of it, but miracles aren't really necessary. Prophecy really nails it in. Yeah. So if this person is receiving outside knowledge of the future, which only God can know about, what does that say? That is, he's receiving revelation from God, thus proving his prophethood. So when we look at Muhammad sallallahu, he received that. So if like we have a detailed account of Daniel, is not mentioned in the Quran, in the Hadith, but if we went to Daniel and we went to his biography and he received all these prophecies, yeah, that would prove he's a prophet. And same with Jesus. Yes, this is
All right.
obviously a
So
criteria.
then again, like so if you take Jesus to be a prophet,
No.
and so if you did your study, you take say you take Daniel to be a prophet, and they're not in contradiction with each other, then they're both prophets. Like so now they're on the same playing field as Muhammad, unless you have some additional criteria you haven't mentioned.
No, yeah, they'd be prophets like Muhammad says them. Yeah.
Okay, then. So if we can show that Daniel and Jesus were in accord with each other, and they're both prophets, then, or let's say, I can stretch it out even further. Let's say there's two books in Hinduism, right? Let's say the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata. Let's say there's no contradictions. They both claim they're prophets. There's millions of people that claim that these prophets did miracles. On your criteria that you've given so far, you would have to accept the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, right?
No, because we don't
What is
know.
the additional criteria then?
We have to actually confirm that this Gita was actually, I don't know what his name is, but we have to actually prove that the Gita was actually revealed to so and so, whoever the Hindus claim it was
Well, how would you
revealed
prove
to.
that?
We have to prove that through chains of narration. And my studies, the Gita only has like one chain of narration, which is broken. So we can't confirm that.
Sure. Maybe we move on to something else. Just a quick comment. Why do you think the Haredi Jews are some sort of reliable standard that you brought up?
I don't consider them a reliable standard. It's just I look at both the arguments from the Jews and the Christians. Haredi Jews just seem to know more about their Bibles, so I go to them to see what do they say about
what
it.
makes you think that's true? Why do you think Haredi Jews know more about the Bible than Christians say?
Because Christians tend to misquote, like when you actually read like the Bible and you look at the quotes that Christians quote, a lot of the quotes they give are misquotes. And then like a Haredi Jew maybe will point that out, and then I'll have to go read it myself. I won't take his word for it. I'll go and read it myself. And I'm like, oh yeah, the Jew is actually right on this. The only time I've ever, really disagreed with the Jew and took the side of the Christians is in regards to like Daniel 9, where it talks about the 70 weeks. Like, okay, yeah, that seems pretty obvious. It's talking about Jesus. But in regards to like verses like in Isaiah, like Isaiah 53 or like Isaiah 7, where, they're taking it completely out of context and Christians just didn't read the whole chapter, then I'm going to side with the Jews on that. So I take arguments from both sides depending on which argument has the most valid evidence.
All right, so for people who are listening who might not know, Haredi Judaism is just basically ultra-Orthodox Judaism. These people have the Talmud. I would think that Muslims would be at least as much as Christians. Muslims would reject their interpretations. They reject Muhammad, right? So, why would you take the Haredi Jew interpretation of some set of passages rather than the one inspired by Christ, who you take to be a prophet?
Again, because you can't prove that these statements, which are in the New Testament, which are attributed to Jesus, are actually from Jesus. So how do I know if he actually said them or not?
Well, look, saying the point is that the Christians who followed Christ, his apostles and their immediate successors, his disciples, their immediate successors, they have certain interpretations of Old and New Testament prophets, scriptures and passages. Now you're saying that you're looking at like modern day ultra Orthodox Jews to get some sort of higher knowledge there, and it seems strange to me. Why would you take their interpretation over the one that is, at least in some sense, of your own tradition, Christ?
No, because here's the deal. So we believe the Jews are right about some things and the Christians are right about some things. So I look at their arguments and see which one actually makes sense. It just so happens that Jews, when I read their scriptures, they seem to have, in most cases, it seems to be the correct interpretation. But like I said, I don't just take the Jewish interpretation. I go to Christians and I ask them, like, what's your argument against Jews? And then they'll give me verses. I'll compare that with the Jewish interpretation. I'll be like, okay, well, this one's more valid or this one's more valid. Like I said, I don't always take the Jewish interpretation. Like Daniel 9, I take the Christian interpretation on that one. But in regards to like Isaiah 53, I'll take the Jewish interpretation on that one. So it's not exclusive to Jews.
All right, so let's deal with Isaiah 3. Isaiah, what was it you said, 3?
53.
53, that's right, sorry. Isaiah 53, I'm going to pull it up on the New King James Version. We'll talk about it. We'll see if you're right or I'm right. The sin-bearing Messiah, Baba Gateway, Isaiah, I guess we're, New King James. Okay, so, who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no special beauty. I added special. There is no beauty that we should desire in him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. And we like sheep have gone astray; we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge, and my righteous servant shall justify many. He shall bear many iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death. He was numbered with the transgressors. He bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. So, what in that passage there tells you it's not Christ? What Haredi Jew have you read that tells you that's not referring to Jesus Christ, the Messiah?
I don't even need to go to Haredi Jew to explain why that's not talking about Jesus. If we just if you read the whole book of Isaiah, didn't just read that chapter, because
Well, you brought the chapter up, so tell me about the chapter.
No.
Tell me about the context.
You're cutting me off. Okay, I'll explain it. Just let me talk. So, in regards to this, if you read the whole chapter of Isaiah, like if you take it out of context, right? If you took that,
This was what you told me to look up.
can I talk? So, like,
well, tell me what to go back to get context, please.
Can I talk?
Go.
So, if you read the entire book so if you took a chapter of a book and then you just like ripped it out and didn't read the other chapters, you think you're gonna understand it? No, you're not gonna understand it. So, in regards to this, if you took it out of context and you just read only that chapter, didn't read the rest of Isaiah, yeah, it looks like it's talking about Jesus. It looks like it's talking about not Jesus, but the Christian Jesus specifically, about him dying for people's sin, because it says he bore the transgressions of many. But if you actually look at the entire book of Isaiah, and because the word servant is mentioned in 53, and if you we're going to focus on that word servant, if you looked at who the servant is identified, which Isaiah identifies many times, it's talking about the nation of Israel, and it's talking about Jacob, which his other name is Israel. So when we have in like on Isaiah 41, Isaiah 44, Isaiah 45, Isaiah 48, all of them, when Isaiah is talking about this servant, it's always about Israel. It never deviates. And then that starts to make sense. Like, okay, the servant's talking about Israel. Okay. But if you took the chapter out of context, you would think the servant is talking about one person, singular. But if you read the whole chapter and you actually see who the servant is that Isaiah identifies multitudes of times, and he never deviates from it, it's talking about the nation of Israel as a whole. If you just
Right, but Jacob himself is referred to as Israel. So already you have acknowledged or conceded that the nation of Israel and the person Jacob are being referred to in some sort of typological way. And there's no reason to think that Christ also isn't. In the context of Christianity, we would say Christ is a type of Israel. He's a type of David. He's a type of Adam, right? So there's typology throughout the Old and New Testament. Now, you brought up Isaiah 53, not me. I read it. Now you're saying there's some deeper context. You mentioned some passages in 44, 41, 42. All right, so fine. Tell me where it shows, or from the Haredi Jews or from your own reading. Tell me where it shows in these earlier passages that this cannot be referring to Christ.
Okay, so in Isaiah 41, 8, 9, but you, O Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen, offspring of Abraham, who loved me, and to whom I say, you are my servant. I have chosen you and not rejected you. And Isaiah 44, verse 1, but hear now, Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen. And then it says in Isaiah 44, verse 21, remember these things, Jacob and Israel, for you are my servants. And then it says in Isaiah 45, verse 4, for the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen one. And then it says in Isaiah 48, verse 20, say, God has redeemed his servant Jacob. And it says in chapter 49, verse 3, you are my servant Israel, in whom I take glory. So you have these repetitious passages always identifying who the servant is, but then for some reason you think Isaiah just randomly switched his writing style and who the servant is without saying his name. Whenever the servant is being talked about, it mentions his name, and if it doesn't mention his name, that's because Isaiah already thought you knew who the servant was, so he didn't need to feel the need to identify him again.
Sure. So the passages you quoted, they do not preclude that these passages also mean Christ, right? Because they already mean Israel, they already mean Jacob. So nothing that you've quoted there, which is very precious few quotes, like you just said, a few small passages, nothing there precludes that this also refers to the Messiah, who's the fulfillment of Israel, and who, within the Christian context, is a type of Israel. And there's certainly many parallels. For example, Christ, with the slaughter of the innocents, he flees to Egypt, just like he flees to Egypt. He's in the desert for 40 days, like the Jews were for 40 years, or the book of Daniel, and so on. So the Christians see this as a typology of the ultimate fulfillment of Israel, and presumably Islam recognizes that Christ was the Messiah. He was the fulfillment of the Jewish prophecies. So nothing you've said there would preclude that from being an additional typological interpretation there, right?
Okay, but if it was talking about Jesus, why didn't Isaiah, who repetitiously identified it only as Jacob and Israel, why didn't he identify that this
Right,
verse is talking about the Messiah?
Now, even in your own worldview, where was Jacob? Where were our sins borne upon him? Where were we healed by his stripes, which means like whip strokes?
What do you mean, like the nation of Israel?
You're saying it refers to Jacob and Israel, right? So where were we? Where was I? Where was my sins borne by the troubles that Israel had?
Okay, so in chapters 52 and 54, if we read both of them, which includes 53, Isaiah is referring to the Gentile nations, obviously non-Jews, who have been tormented and inflicted pain and suffering on the Jewish people. It is these nations who will be astounded and shocked to see that God has saved us from their persecution and returned us to our home. Okay, so this is what it's referring to. It's talking about not a single prophet or Messiah. It's referring to nations. It's not referring to specifically a Messiah. If it was talking about the Messiah, it would identify it just as Isaiah identified that the servant is multiple times Israel.
Your claim is that it refers to Jacob and Israel, right?
Yes.
Okay, and Jacob he was also named Israel, and he's a type of Israel as a nation, as its forebear, as its progenitor, right? So where did Jacob bear our sins? Where were we healed by his stripes?
No, but
where was he the servant?
It's talking about in this verse, obviously, the nation of Israel, because it's identified as Jacob and Israel, both. Yeah. So obviously, Jacob lived before Isaiah, so it has to be talking about the nation of Israel as a whole. Because this.
Right, so let me read you some passages from Isaiah 52, 13 through 15. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So will he sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they had not heard, they will understand. So how does that refer to the nation of Israel?
Because the nation of Israel was identified as the chosen servants. It just seems very improbable and unlikely that Isaiah would just randomly switch his writing mode and say that, okay, this is talking about a Messiah, even though he identified it as Israel multiple times and only as Israel. So why would it randomly bring up the Messiah?
Now, where in Islam does it say that Israel did these things, or Jacob did?
We don't really need to, because again, we believe that the scriptures are corrupted. Who knows if was this written by Isaiah or not? Maybe. I don't know. I don't have this problem. But
Here's Isaiah 52, 1 through 12. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, and familiar with suffering, like one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised and was esteemed him not, and we esteemed him not. That's referring to a nation?
So again, it could be speaking in a euphemism because again, like this, every single time the servant is mentioned, Isaiah has a writing style of specifying who the servant is. If you read the chapters, you
I've
would
read the whole book
realize
many
this.
times.
Okay, well then you would realize that Isaiah never talks about the servant being the Messiah.
Oh, here we
Ever.
go. So here we'll continue on. Number 4. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. 5. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. So, how is this possibly referring to the Jewish nation? Like, how would the Jews be saying to
Because
themselves?
Isaiah identified it as speaking about the Jewish nation.
You've already admitted the typological relation between Jacob himself as a person and Israel as a nation.
Okay,
So you've
okay,
already
yeah,
accepted the typology.
yes, but it never identifies it as a Messiah. If we're gonna if Isaiah was gonna be consistent, he would have specified that this servant now is going to be the Messiah, but he never mentions that because he already
Where was
assumes you read the book.
Now here's number 9. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. So where was Jacob or Israel assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death? Because you've heard this from the Haredi Jews, so tell me.
Okay, repeat the question.
Okay, again, number 9, Isaiah 52:9 here. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, just like Christ was crucified, and then Joseph of Arimathea, a rich guy, gave him a tomb. Though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. How on earth do you think this affirms Jacob or Israel rather than Jesus Christ?
Because Isaiah affirmed that the servant is talking about Jacob and Israel. He affirmed it. I don't need any more evidence other than that because that's what the writer of the book said. He only identified it as Israel. He never identified it as Messiah.
Could you understand how prophecy works?
Okay, again, just because something looks like something to you, like, oh, it's too much of a coincidence, we can't reject it. Dude, every single time Isaiah identifies who the servant is, it's always Israel or Jacob. And Jacob also called Israel. It's never referring to the
All right, so
Messiah.
here's
If it was talking about the Messiah, why didn't they identify it like he did with
So
Israel?
let me read to you here. What do the early rabbis say? Now I'm reading from some Messianic Jewish literature, just as you can read from the Haredi Talmudic Jews. I'm going to read some Jews for Jesus or Messianic Jews. Some of the first written interpretations or targums, ancient paraphrases on biblical texts, see this passage as referring to an individual servant, the Messiah, who would suffer. Messianic Jewish Talmudists, for instance, Rachmiel Friedland, recounts these early views. Our ancient commentators, with one accord, noted that the context clearly speaks of God's anointed one, the Messiah. The Aramaic translation of this chapter, ascribed to Rabbi Jonathan ben Uziel, a disciple of Hillel, probably one of the most important rabbis, who lived in early 2nd century CE after Christ, begins with the simple and worthy words: Behold, my servant Messiah shall prosper, he shall be high and increase and be exceeding strong, as the house of Israel looked to him through many days, because their countenance was darkened among the peoples, and their complexion beyond the sons of men. We find the same interpretation in the Babylonian Talmud. What is his, the Messiah's, name? The rabbi said, His name is the leper scholar, as it is written, Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper, smitten of God and afflicted. Sanhedrin 98b, obviously referring to Isaiah. Similarly, in an explanation of Ruth 2:14 in the Midrash Rabbah, it states, He is speaking of the King Messiah. Come hither, draw near the throne, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. This refers to the chastisements, as it was said, but he was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The Zohar, in its interpretation of Isaiah 53, points to the Messiah as well. There is in the Garden of Eden a palace named the Palace of the Sons of Sickness, the palace the Messiah enters, and he summons every pain, every chastisement of Israel, and all of these come and rest upon him. And had he not thus lightened them upon himself, there had been no man able to bear Israel's chastisements for the transgression of the law, as it is written, surely our sickness he has carried. So again, like you're just totally out of your depth. You're referring to some Haredi Jews. You've made some cursory reading of this, but you're not even familiar. And that's just the Jewish views. I can go on throughout the entire Middle Ages, even prior to Muhammad. It's a description of the Messiah.
Okay, so first of all, those people which you identified, were they actually considered as authoritative um,
scholars during their time, and do Jews actually take them as authoritative scholars today or at that time? You just quoted like
Who,
some. I could quote you
who is
multiple
the who is
imams
the first
which have
one?
heretical views.
Do you even remember who the first one I mentioned was?
No, I don't remember his name.
Okay. I don't know how close you were listening. Ascribed to Rabbi Jonathan ben Uziel, a disciple of Hillel, who lived in the early 2nd century. These, of course, were important
Okay,
authorities.
so then we'd have to look at the chain of narration and see if he was actually a student, and we'd have to read the
Chain of
biography.
narration again. All right, let's move on to something else here.
Even
chain
in
of
Jeremiah 30, it says the servant is Jacob and Israel.
Okay, hang on a second. Muhammad or something. Now you say Muhammad is like some special prophet. You haven't really given a criteria why. You say Islamic scholars are
Why did
sort of
I
the
ever
criteria,
say that? I just said he's a prophet, just like Jesus and Moses.
but you take his words to be authoritative over anything that came prior. So he's obviously
That's because though that which came prior, it has been corrupted. Yeah, the Quran has not been corrupted. Therefore, we take that over the corrupted sources.
But the only reason you believe it hasn't been corrupted is because Islamic scholars tell you that. That's a circular reasoning.
No, we can even look at the Torah and the Tanakh and the New Testament themselves and see multiple errors and contradictions.
Okay, but I mean, I haven't come prepared with contradictions in the Quran or between different sects of Islam, but I'm sure there's tons of them. So, I mean, you can hold that off for a different time, or I can look it up during the question and answer period. Because there's tons of claims that I'm just not fully familiar with where there are obvious contradictions. But since I'm not willing to back that up now, I won't hold that as a point that you need to reply to. Now, as far as change of narration, different church fathers refer to specific statements from the Gospels, and they have obvious chains of. I mean, we know which church father taught which other church father, and multiple different church fathers refer to similar passages. So that would seem to be a sufficient chain of narration in the exact same sense you mean with Islamic scholars. So, what is the criteria of differentiation that I asked you in the last debate? And you've had a week to prepare. Tell me.
I've already told you. So, in regards to the chains of narration, what you have is this teacher learned from this teacher, learned from this teacher. You don't have chains of narrations for that specific statement. I already said this earlier in the debate, near the beginning. You said, and you admitted that you have this chain narration of teachers who learned from learned from this, and then you'll have Irenaeus in the chain say like it's written in the scriptures that Jesus said such and such. That's not a chain of narration for that statement. He's just saying
Why
that
not?
Jesus said this, but he never gives a chain narration that
Right,
I
but
learned this statement from this guy, this guy, this guy. It's completely different.
well, who cares if he says it in that book or if it's lost? Like we historically we know that this apostle taught this successor who taught Irenaeus. Like that is a chain of narration, and it comports perfectly well with other gospel statements that other chains of narration in the church fathers also affirm. I don't see any criteria that distinguishes this from what you do with Islamic scholars.
There is a complete difference because in regards to the hadith in narrations in Islam, it's literally chains, not just one, but multitudes of chains for just one statement or action, right? It's not this person learned from this person, learned from this person, and then some person along in the chain said, okay, Jesus said this. Okay, that's what you have. But in regards to us, we say that this statement, this person said this statement, and it goes all the way back to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or one of the companions. So those are chains of narration for a specific statement or action. It's not just who learned from who. That's not how it goes. Because even in Islam, you'll have scholars who learn from this scholar, learn from this scholar, learn from this scholar. But maybe in the chain narration, there's a scholar who had a wrong opinion, or maybe he misquoted a hadith. Does that mean we have to take his opinion because he has a chain narration of he was taught from this guy, this guy, this guy? Thus, this statement that he says, which has no chain narration, therefore it's authoritative, even though it contradicts. No, we don't accept it. So it's completely different. Like your mode of transmission is something we consider weak. It's not a chain narration for those statements. It's just a chain narration of who learned from who. And on top of that, I don't think you have comprehensive biographies of these peoples in these chains.
I'm trying to really wrap my head around the difference here. So you have 4 gospels, right? And amongst these gospels, some of them quote other gospels, but they also quote independent things that are considered sources like L for Luke or Q. between Mark and Matthew. So there's at least like 4 or at least 5 independent gospel writers who are writing the biography of Christ's life. They quote him very similarly. You also have many epistles. You have corroboration among secular scholars like Josephus, Tacitus, Suetonius. You have the tomb of James that's found, brother of Jesus. You have inscriptions of Pilate that's found, and then on top of all this, you have the apostles, immediate disciples, all bear each other out, and it goes on. If you could fit the ante-Nicene fathers before the Council of Nicaea, that's going to take up the size of Encyclopedia Britannica. There's so many of them. I don't say none of them disagree with each other on any point, but I also wouldn't assume that no Muslim scholar disagrees with some other Muslim scholar. So I'm still hazy here on what the difference is between what you call these self-attesting chains of narration for Muhammad statements versus the chains of narration for things Christ taught. I still don't understand the criteria that differentiates these two.
The chains of narration in Islam aren't self-attesting. Other people attest to those chains of narration. Example, we could have like one hadith narration and there's like 10 chains, and there's people in the chains who never met each other, right? Like obviously everyone in like one chain met met each other, but there's another chain where people in the chain, they never met each other, yet they're recording the same information and they don't contradict, right? Okay.
Right.
For a specific statement or action, it's not just who learned from who, and then like he says something and then that apparently proves the source. That's not how it works. It works of this source says something, and then you have like 10 people there and 10 different chains get started and they all agree with each other. That means that the information was preserved accurately, which
Right. That's perfect.
Christianity doesn't
That's
have.
perfect because not the church fathers also didn't all know each other, and there's hundreds of them, and they have the same attestation to passages and acts of Christ's life. So it's identical.
No, it's not identical because there's not a specific chain narration for a specific statement or a specific action. And on top of that, the only like actual chain you guys have, which I've looked at with
I have a
other
question for you.
Christians, was the one with Irenaeus and
Sure.
whatever is on it, Polycarp.
When
That's
was
the
when was the Quran written down first?
So it was written down first after the hijrah to the migration to Medina, because
How
at
many
the
years
time,
after Muhammad? How many years after Muhammad?
no, it was written during his life.
Okay, so immediately you have a written text that any of these people, chains of narration, could reference easily. Unlike the Christian church, where the Bible itself was not actually put into writing till many years later. So that actually strengthens the Christian case because they have the same chain of narration even without a book to reference. Whereas you guys, any of these Islamic scholars could quote something from Christ or the Hadith that was already written down. They didn't need any chain. They could have just made a chain up.
Chief, if this chain of narration for Christianity was so strong, which it isn't because there's only one.
You're not dealing with the critique I just gave. We talking
No,
about Christianity.
I am. You're cutting me off. Okay, so you only have one unbroken chain, and that's in regards to Irenaeus and Polycarp, which I've looked at. The other chains are broken and weak.
Why would you think that?
Because if you actually look at the chains for Polycarp and Irenaeus, then you look at it for the other people. The other chains, we don't even have cohesive biographies of these other people in these other chains. The only ones I saw with cohesive, well, semi-cohesive biographies were for Polycarp and Irenaeus and other people in the chains.
The only ones that you've seen.
Okay, okay, I've looked at like 4, and the only one I saw was
There's
Polycarp.
hundreds of fathers.
Okay, no, I don't care how many fathers there are. We're talking about chains,
Right,
not
but
just
those
how many
chains
church
would-
fathers there were.
Those,
Okay,
those
so
chains
there's
would apply
hundreds
to
of
every
chains?
father. And no, hang on, stop. So if you have hundreds of church fathers, then obviously you're going to have many, many chains back to the original 11 disciples after Jesus was gone, and he was replaced, of course. But so you have 12 disciples, and there's oral tradition.
Okay,
we
so
accept
do you have
tradition
12
just
chains?
as stop. Just as you have oral tradition, we have oral tradition. Just as the people of the Old Testament, we don't have biographies of everyone who transmitted the Old Testament before it was codified in writing. This whole argument seems vacuous.
No, it's not. Because if you have 12 disciples, right? Do you have 12 solid chains of narrations with biographies of every single person in the chain?
Why would you need that? Why would you even think that would
Because
be
we
needed?
have to confirm whether these people were truthful or not.
Yeah, but I mean, anybody can write some apocryphal biography of a church father that we might reject because we have high rigorous standards. Whereas it seems you just accept any biography in some chain of narration that could have been apocryphal.
No, there's a whole science
Well,
of
how how do you know that every link in the chain of narration was not some later apocryphal biography on some guy's name who nobody actually wrote at the time? How do you know that?
because okay, so we actually sorry about that. We actually just give me a sec here. Someone called me.
Take your time.
There we go. So in regards to that, see now I lost track. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, that's right, the chains. Okay, so in regards to the chains, literally every single person in the chain, we have detailed biographies of them. Okay, detailed. Like we know that they were
Right.
truthful.
So
And in their biographies, which are like volumes long just for one person, we know that this man actually met that man who it's recorded that he reported to, this narration.
sure, but
Christian
how do you know that?
how do we know that? Because there's literally multiple biographies um like about these people, and we know everything that's detailed in their life because the biographies themselves have chains of narration for them, because we know that
It doesn't matter how many cars are there without the engine driving the train cars. Like you could have 5 different detailed biographies. The question is, how do you know they're true biographies and not something written later as apocrypha?
because these biographies also have chains of narration for the people reporting this information
You're
about
just
these
referring.
biographies,
You're,
thus
you're referring.
strengthening what.
You're referring back to the same criteria that's in dispute. It's circular.
How is that circular? Then you need to call your own criteria
Listen,
circular.
I can go out tomorrow and write a biography of Lactantius, some Christian. I mean, and then I could bury in the ground. I mean, how do you know that these chains of narration, these biographies, are not apocryphal?
Okay, you honestly think that you can write volumes and volumes about a one man's life and not have it contradict and have it be cohesive, and it'll agree with
Well, I know.
other biographies written by him? You
I
honestly
mean,
think you can do that? It's not how
I
life
think
works.
I take if I took a 1 year period to study all these chains of narration or multiple biographies of one person, I'm sure I'd find contradictions in them. That's just how things work.
Okay, well, you're making a claim and you need to back that up. Whether there's contradictions
Well,
in these biographies.
I don't intend to take a year off of my other things and actually find these contradictions. I can maybe like look them up for our next debate, and then you'll have to sit there and defend any contradiction I find. But as I said earlier, I don't want you to defend something that I can't validate at the moment. You're claiming that there's no contradictions. I don't even think you've read them all. You're taking someone's word for it, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So until we actually both read all of them for a year, then we won't know if there's contradictions, right?
I suppose. In
Okay.
regards to the biographies,
So I figure we can move on now. It's been about an hour and a half, 90 minutes. We can move on to the Trinity in the Old Testament, or we can just go to the. We've covered everything. We can go to the. We could spend 5 minutes on the Trinity in the Old Testament, or we can go on to the question and answers.
Whatever you want, it's fine.
All right. So I'm reading here from Blue Letter Bible. I'm not sure how reliable a source it is because I said I didn't have too much time to prepare, but it says the doctrine of the Trinity in the Old Testament is not plainly revealed. So as Christians, we accept that there's progressive revelation. I think you would have to be committed to it as a Muslim. Also, you deny it, but that's fine. We can hold that off to next debate. So here, let's start. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Hebrew word for God is Elohim. Elohim is a plural noun. It is used here with a singular verb, bara. In the remainder of the Old Testament, when Elohim speaks of the true God, it is always used with a singular verb. The conclusion to be drawn is that in some sense, God is both singular and plural. The doctrine of the Trinity states this. Within the nature of God, within the nature of the one God, there are 3 eternal hypostases. God says, let us. We find a further hint here in Trinity, Genesis 1. Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion, and so on and so forth. The phrase let us again gives us the idea of plurality. There's more references. Genesis 3:22. The Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now he might stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. And Tower of Babel, God says, come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. As Isaiah says, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. Another plural for God. This is also in Isaiah. For your maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer, the God of the whole earth he is called. I don't see where. Oh, here it says the word translated maker is plural in Hebrew. And there's plenty more. It goes on and on.
Yeah, in regards to that, a Hebrew speaker who actually knows the language would attest to that's talking about the plurality of majesty, because in
maybe a
Arabic,
Haredi Jew.
okay, but it makes sense because in Arabic, yeah, we have this same thing. We have like God referring to let us or this or we. So actually, in the Quran, God actually refers to himself as well in the plural. Yet you find no Muslim believing that God is plural. Why? Because in Semitic languages, which is what we're working with, Hebrew likewise is a Semitic language, is referring to the plurality of majesty. And in fact, not even just Semitic languages, you can even find this in English and other European languages, where kings and royalty will refer to we decree or we decree this or that. So, in regards to the plurality of majesty, this is well attested to in Hebrew. If you actually go to someone who actually studies Hebrew, they will attest to the same thing, because the same thing even exists in Arabic.
So tell me, so all of the Christian scholars over 2,000 years who knew Hebrew, many of them did, and all of the original Jews who became Christians, who spoke Semitic languages, Aramaic, they were all deceived, and your Haredi Jews of modern times who hate Christianity are right.
No, because even if you go to rabbis before Jesus existed, they also believe that this is talking about the plurality of majesty. You can just go like refer to again. We can actually someone after Jesus. You can actually go refer to Ibn Ezra, which quotes many rabbis in regards to like Hebrew linguistics. It's the plurality of majesty is well attested to even before the time of Jesus, and it makes complete sense because Arabic also has this, and the Quran even has this. Yet you find no Muslim saying that God is plural.
I would just encourage people to look into the plurality in the language stuff, because I'm not a linguist, I'm not an expert there. Neither are you. So people can look into that on their own accord. But of course, as we understand, after Christ came, a large proportion of the Jewish people at the time followed him, and they understood the language at the time directly. And of course, over the centuries, thousands and thousands of Jews during the Middle Ages converted to Christianity. Some of their best scholars did after the Disputatio. These are public disputes held, debates between rabbis and bishops and monks and so on. So we've had many Jews all the way up to this day. Jews for Jesus, Messianic Jews. They read their own Old Testament. They know the Hebrew, and they accept the plurality. You're saying it's some plurality of majesty from the Islamic perspective. You keep referring to ultra-Orthodox Jews who have their own motivations and so on. So I don't think we could settle this dispute here and now. So I'm happy to move on and go to questions, and maybe that'll take 20 to 30 minutes.
Wait, what? The Q&A?
Well, we've done this for an hour and a half. We've covered every
yeah.
topic. So if you want to do a Q&A with the people who are here, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer to the best of my ability. Maybe we'll take a minute break and come back.
I don't really even think there needs to be a closing statement. We just go straight to Q&A.
Yeah, but I didn't say a minute closing. I said a minute break.
No, I know. I just like saying
Yeah.
I wasn't saying that in reference to your statement though.
Okay, so I'll be back in a minute and we'll take questions.
Alrighty. Well, that was nice. You see,
Yeah, you guys are great. I don't have to do anything.
why can't debates be more like this? This is like actually enjoyable.
That's because you get people who don't want to debate and they just want to espouse their opinion because they think they're absolutely right and won't give other people chances. Like Mr. Batman.
Mr. Batman is hilarious, and he needs his own TV show.
I love Mr.
Yes,
Batman.
he is entertaining, I must admit.
Repent or perish.
Well, you know what Mr. Batman says when he gets a shitty paint job from his contractors, right?
Oh,
What?
He says, repaint or perish.
Repaint or perish. I was listening to that yesterday.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, continue.
Oh, yeah. So if anyone wants to ask us anything for a little while, we can do that.
You gotta, yeah. So, I'm just gonna. We can just move, or I'm just gonna start unmuting people. I think. They can ask, and if they're trouble, I'll just mute them again. Just go down the list. If anybody want to ask questions. Okay, that one's unmuted. And then this one.
Gumbo.
And there's a couple here that are, Gumbo, you're unmuted. There's a couple here that are deafened and muted. I wonder why. I wonder why they do that. Well, lots of people to unmute. So I'm going down the list. I'm down to, who's this person here? People with funny names. I'm not going to even bother trying to pronounce them. Okay, you're all unmuted.
Here, direct questions towards B33. I'm gonna be back in like 2 minutes, and then you can ask me questions when I get back. Just wait.
Sure. There you go, Vortex. If you can even come back, I think it mutes you again. So that's why I suggest you maybe in a different room. But if you leave, and come back, you'll be muted again. Okay, you're unmuted too. L and whatever. And Alphas. So don't leave and come back because you'll be muted again. So no questions from anyone? Alrighty. Maybe everyone wants to ask a boo-based questions.
Yeah, it's fine either way. It was a good debate. We covered a lot of ground, so maybe no one has a question. All right, so I'll just in the silence here, I'll just read Colossians 1:16 through 17. So this is not really going to persuade anyone if you don't accept the validity of Colossians, but if you do, it's a clear statement, an early statement. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And that's referring to Christ. So all throughout the New Testament, if you accept it to be not some sort of later forgery, and modern scholars don't think that, and they were already teaching the divinity of Christ extremely early. So it's not just like the book of John later or something. It's all types of references. Hebrews 1:8, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. This is he speaking of the Son. He says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
That was a good debate, by the way. I have like B33. Do you believe in the doctrine of eternal generation?
If you mean by that the Son is eternally generated of the Father, then yes. But I'm not some sort of expert on all the intricacies of it, so I don't want to commit too firmly. There may be something in there. He gets this a
Uh,
lot from the Eastern Orthodox, yeah. So I'm not sure.
yeah, that's the Orthodox understanding of the Trinity.
But I think that's pretty common to a lot of Latin fathers and Catholics, and so I don't think it contradicts Catholicism. It might contradict with social Trinitarians who are sort of a modern group.
So I just thought I'd mention if you I think Looper might post it again. Our YouTube channel. All the
my
debates
question,
are in there, so you can check it out. But
my question.
Looper will post a link. Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, does the Father choose to generate the Son?
No, I think it's an essential attribute. It's not a free choice. It's not a creation. It's something. My understanding of it from Augustine and Aquinas and lots of other early fathers, Greek and Latin, they say that the Son is the Logos. So he's sort of like the self-reflection of the Father. The Father knows himself perfectly well, and in doing so generates the Son, the Logos, and they are one in will, one in nature, one in knowledge, except for the only knowledge I would say they have that's different would be the Father knows he is the Father. He knows his relation to the Son and vice versa. But other than that, they're one in will, one in nature, one in knowledge.
I'm
Of
assuming.
course, they have different roles in the created order, perhaps, but that doesn't compromise their consubstantiality or their common essence.
I'm assuming your answer is no.
No, it's I affirm eternal generation. It's not a choice. Yeah, if that's what you mean by no, then no, it's not a choice.
So the Father is not free. He was forced to generate the Son.
Well, only in the sense, first of all, God has no forces acting upon him. He has a nature, though, and if that nature entails a relationship within himself of generation and procession,
Wait,
then that's excuse me, that's
okay, go ahead.
simply entailed by his nature. Same way to be good is entailed by his nature. He didn't have the choice to be bad. Like he didn't have the choice to change 2 and 2 to equal 8. There are many things about the essence of God that are not choices.
You're conflicting two things. We're not talking about attributes or the nature of it. We're talking
Well,
about
I'm using it as an analogy, right?
of
It's an analogy.
generating someone. He has
Right. So what I'm saying is,
he
it
doesn't have
doesn't compromise his freedom.
he doesn't have the free the free will to not generate the Son.
No, because it's part of the divine nature to be Trinitarian, right?
But
To be triune.
the Son is already gets generated by the Father, so
Yeah, timelessly.
it was not free then.
No, we don't say he was free. Well, the Son's not a creation, so the only sense in which God would be free to generate the Son is if the Son was a creation, which he's not. He's co-eternal, consubstantial.
I don't say that he's a creation.
Well, look, if the Father had a choice to generate or not generate the Son, then the Son would be a creation, as far as I can tell.
No, not necessarily.
But you need to argue why that wouldn't be true. Because to me, it just seems obvious on his face that if the Father could choose not to generate the Son, then it's a voluntary creation. So if you have some objection to that, you got to draw that out. So, does anyone have any more questions? It looks like Abu is still gone, so I'll probably.
No, I just got back.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I answered a question or two. I don't know if there's any for you. We don't have to draw it out. We could get questions in our DMs or in our Discord chat, text, and so on. So I'm assuming you went to get some food, and I'm getting hungry too.
Yeah, food's pretty good. Although I have none right now. I have pizza and ramen.
Yeah, well, any food is good food when you're hungry.
That's true.
Some people just have dirt.
That's true too. I think that's in Haiti where they make like mud pies or something.
Just something to put in your stomach. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Abu, thanks for being, cordial and nice. If I interrupted or was aggressive at times, sorry about that. And if you want to talk in like DM or argue in DM, that's fine too.
Sure. All right. Sounds good.
I could be wrong. You could be wrong, right? So, is there any other questions for anybody, or want to call a wrap to it?
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think it's a wrap. Well, thanks, guys. It was great. I didn't have to do anything. It's just the way I like it. Two people that are cordial. Excellent.
Thanks for hosting. It was a good time, and maybe we'll do another one. All right, we'll do a Trinity.
All righty.
See you later.
Boris, I got a question for you.
Sure.